Excellent. This is very exciting for me. Thank you for all sticking out the entire program here. We're going to talk a little bit about travel and tourism trends in sports. It's a theme that I've heard quite a bit today and yesterday, and we're going to take a little deeper dive into it. I'm going to share a lot of numbers with you. I don't want to scare you. I promise it'll be okay. I'll walk you through them. And the numbers that I'm going to share with you aren't even as important as some of the messaging, I think, behind those numbers. So a little bit about me and our magazine, Sports Travel, if you're not familiar with it. We have been publishing for 25 years. This is our 25th anniversary this year of the magazine. We're a business-to-business magazine that connects event organizers with largely destinations and venues that want to host sports events, and we write about everything. We certainly write about your industry quite a bit, but we write about the entire sports industry. We are part of the North Star Meetings Group, North Star Travel Group. Our company has other business magazines in the travel space. Ours obviously focuses specifically on sports events. Donna had mentioned Sports Illustrated before. If any of you are familiar with Sports Illustrated, you'll know that they are famous for their cover jinx. Whoever they put on the cover tends to lose the championship or whatever event they are writing about. They're famous for it. It's been happening for generations. Sports Travel Magazine, we internally call it the Sports Travel Bump. Whoever we put on the cover always tends to win their championships. So to my friends from the Netherlands on Saturday, this is our current cover with the U.S. team. You might have noticed that we help them all through the group stage, and we'll see what happens on Saturday, but I'm just saying if they pull the upset, you all heard it here first, and you know exactly why that happened. So that's our current cover. So I'm going to talk to you about a number of things here. The first slide I want to show you is actually something that we talk about to destinations when we are trying to talk to them about the case for the power of sports events, the power of your events. And I would argue that while you're obviously in the sports industry, you're in the running industry, you are very much in the travel industry, whether you realize that or not. I thought the comments from the Minister of Sports Tourism earlier today from Thailand, you could see their approach to it, even his title and his approach to sports as tourism. So these next couple of things I'm going to run through, I just wanted to give you some context because these are the discussions we have with destinations when we try to explain to them the power of the overall sports market. So the first thing that's nice to know is that these attributes are largely unchanged since the pandemic. And the first thing we mention to everybody is that sports events are not just the major professional sports. They are everything. They're very broad. They, of course, include your industry, and they include many other sports. Sometimes that's an eye-opener for some cities that think they must go after only the big professional sports, the things that they know. Of course, as you know, hundreds of sports hold championship events and tournaments. It's very wide range. We write about some amazing sports, some sports you don't even know are sports, but if they have a championship in something and they're bringing people to town, we consider them sports events, and we write about them. This goes without saying for you all in this room, but these are the types of things we tell destinations to remind them. Not everything is in a stadium or an arena. Events can be held in convention centers, hotel ballrooms, of course on parks and in roadways, which you all know very well. Sports event organizers value long-term relationships. It's one of the things that we have espoused in our magazine, Sports Travel. We also have a number of conferences and trade shows that we do. Our signature show is called the Teams Conference, which is designed to make relationships between event organizers and destinations that want to host their events, and it is a relationship business, as you all know, and that's something that we like to mention. And of course, sporting events are highly visible, their impact is easily measured, and they enhance the quality of life for residents. That's something is a common theme that we've heard in a number of sessions here so far this week. So a little bit more just about the power of the sports market. During the pandemic, sporting events were a leading source of group business. When I talk about group business, I'm talking about hotel room nights, groups that are filling hotels. Sports has always been a great driver of that, and I think during the pandemic they proved just how strong they could be. Youth and amateur sports, a primary driver of family travel. Chris mentioned it the other day with the Singapore Marathon that he goes to compete with his son. We see this in the United States across the board. Family travel, youth travel is really generating a lot of the activity in the sports market. One stat that kind of relates to the first thing that I mentioned, and I'll be mentioning a lot of stats, but I think it's important to talk about what we just went through in the pandemic and to some extent are still going through. From May through August of 2020, kind of the depths of the pandemic, more than a third of all group bookings at IHG hotels, that's a major international hotel company, were from sports-related travel. That's an enormous number when you consider the different types of groups that are providing types of travel. So when we saw stats like that, our eyes kind of lit up because they talk about the power of sports-related travel. This one's interesting. This was from just a couple years ago before the pandemic, but an organization called the U.S. Luxury Travel Report. These are high spending people. They did a survey and they asked them what types of activities they like to do when they go on vacation. And the number of things that popped up related to your industry as well, participating in outdoor sports, being a spectator at a sporting event, participating in these once-in-a-lifetime activities that many of your races really are. These are some of the things that finished on the top of that list for people who are high-end spenders, which is just kind of interesting. So this is the part where I get into some numbers here. We do a lot of work with an organization in the United States called the Sports Events and Tourism Association. It's an association of destinations, of rights holders. I currently serve on the board of directors for that. We, as North Star and Sports Travel Magazine, helped fund a State of the Industry report in 2019, the end of 2019. We, of course, had no idea that we were about to drop off the cliff in 2020, and the nice thing that happened with the timing of this report is it set a benchmark because this was all pre-pandemic, the power of sports-related travel. And the stats I'm going to give you are United States, they're US-based stats, but I think there's something in here that could speak internationally. And so the big takeaway from that first report that we helped fund was that sports-related travel had a direct economic impact in the United States of $45 billion. It's a big number. It's a number that we felt the industry needed to have as they help make the case for bringing sports events. So a little deeper dive into what that is. So from this baseline study that we had, the number of people traveling to attend sports events in the United States had increased by more than 10 million since 2015. So in the 5 years before the pandemic, we were seeing a rise here, and I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. What were they spending all this money on? The vast majority of people, when they're traveling for sports events, they're spending money on transportation. It's airfare, it's car fare, ride shares, whatever it takes to get to the actual event. Next up, of course, not surprising, lodging. They need to stay somewhere, so they're spending money in hotels. And then the next highest category, food and beverage, when they're at events. The number of overnight sports travelers had grown to 96.4 million people in 2019 in the United States. That was an increase of almost 1.5 million from the year before. So things were on an upward trend for the 5 years or so before the pandemic. And then, of course, we hit rock bottom in 2020, which is no surprise. We just commissioned a second version of this study that had results from 2020 and 2021. So the numbers had fallen, of course, in 2020, but the good news is just last year, when there were still quite a few restrictions in place, 39 billion was the number. So you recall before, 45 billion was our number before the pandemic. This shows that it was almost a full recovery. And here's an example of it. Again, that number of people traveling in the US for sports events was 179 million, just almost up to it last year. And when we see these numbers from 22, we know they're going to be high, if not higher. They're spending money pretty much the same proportion, transportation, lodging, food and beverage. and that number of overnight travelers, again, had almost come completely back last year. These are positive numbers and an indication that something is happening. So just another look at those numbers. These are our pre-pandemic numbers. Again, you don't have to focus on all the specific numbers in here other than you see that upward trend that we saw before the pandemic, 5 years of steady growth pretty much across the board. And then here is a look at what happened in 2020. So the drop-off was real. We saw an almost 50% drop-off in spending on sports-related travel in that horrible year of 2020 during the pandemic. But you see what happened, almost an entire rebound in 2021. And again, that was a year that still saw quite a few restrictions and barriers put in place. So these are positive numbers. This is obviously where we want to see things trend, and we think that by the time we see the numbers from this year, they're going to look very positive. Most likely more positive than that. I mentioned before kind of the breakdown of where people are spending their money on sports-related travel. I talked about transportation, lodging, food and beverage. Out of curiosity, if you're interested, the next buckets are recreation. People want to spend time doing other things outside the event. When they're in a destination, they want to spend some money. I have spent some money in my sports-related travel this week here in Bangkok. Maybe some of you have as well. And then the last one, interestingly, tournament operations. Such a small piece of the overall operation when you see where people are spending money to go to sports events. So those were studies that we helped, as I said, we were part of, we helped commission and support. I want to mention a couple of studies to you that we were not involved with, but that we track in the magazine because we're interested in kind of seeing where some of these trends are related to travel. One of the ones that's very interesting to us is by a group called Longwoods International. They're an international research firm. At the start of the pandemic, they started asking a series of questions and doing a series of surveys to gauge traveler sentiment. You know, what is your likelihood that you are going to travel in the next few months? And they have been doing this study pretty much every month since the start of the pandemic, and there's a lot of interesting research in there as you see the different waves of what's happening internationally. This study, again, is based on a U.S. database. They survey 1,000 U.S. people every month, and they release the results. So the most recent one of this came out just last week, and I was able to add this to our presentation because I think there's something telling, and as I get to it, there was one actually very interesting thing that I'd never seen before related to your industry in there. So again, don't get hung up on the numbers in this, but I'll explain what we're looking at here. So one of the interesting questions they ask is, do you plan to travel in the next 6 months? Pretty simple question, and that's what they've been gauging in the course of this study. The figure all the way on the left is March 11th, 2020. For all of those who remember their sports history related to the pandemic, that was the day the NBA in the United States shut down the league, and to me was a watershed moment in the sports industry that something serious was happening here. We saw other leagues take note of that. So on that very day, Longwoods happened to have a survey, and at that point, 87% of people that they surveyed said they plan to go somewhere in the next 6 months. So almost 9 out of 10. Right, before that drop-off moment, they plan to travel. People love to travel, and you see what happened. Within a year, that number was down to, at its lowest point, 57%. So just a little over half, a pretty big drop-off. But go all the way to the right, and this report issued just last week, 92% now of people say they plan to travel in the next 6 months. That's the highest that it's been since the start of the pandemic. So to me, that's a positive number and should be a positive number for all of you as well. Breaking down that a little bit, something else that I find interesting in here. So they ask people, if you are going to travel or if you're having concerns about traveling the next 6 months, what are you concerned about? The first line here is actually a pretty positive number. Does COVID-19, does the pandemic really affect your travel plans? All the way to the right, that darkest number is a number that says, yes, this will greatly impact my decision to travel. That 14% number is actually pretty low. It's the lowest that it's been since they've been tracking this. But I did want to bring up the other two things that are on here because I think they're things you may already inherently know, but it's something for you to keep in mind. People are concerned about their personal financial situation. They're concerned about those transportation costs, which, if you remember, was the highest bucket that they're spending money on. So when you look at greatly impacted all the way on the right there, that dark number, and even the number next to it, which is somewhat of an impact, that's almost 50%. So it's something to be aware of. We're seeing hints of recession and problems, economically, pretty much across the globe. It's something for sure to monitor. And here's just another look at that first number I was telling you about. These are people who said that the coronavirus, COVID-19, is seriously impacting their desire to travel. And you see it all the way from March 11th, on that date that the NBA shut down, when all of a sudden, that number was 35, went all the way up to 66%. But look all the way to the right. That's the number. It's the lowest that it's been. So the pandemic, and I realize this is different for different parts of the world. Certainly if we were doing this for, say, China, we would have different numbers here, perhaps. But this is in the United States, and I think indicative of where a number of things are headed. All right, here's one that I found interesting. As I was last week going through this Longwood study, it's long. There's like 90, 100 pages of this thing. And so I started going through, and this was the first time that I saw something interesting in here. So this talks about for U.S. People who plan to travel during the holidays. So in the United States, that season technically began last week with the holiday we call Thanksgiving, and then it goes through the Christmas and New Year's season. So Longwood's asked people, okay, if you're planning to travel for the holidays, what do you want to do? And obviously people want to visit family and friends. That's the highest number that you see in there. None of these things would be surprising. They want to go shopping for the holidays, see holiday lights, all of these things. And then as you start going down this list, there's some interesting things in here that deal with outdoor activities. Visit a national park or a state park. And as you work your way to the bottom here, you see attend a sporting event. 16% of the people surveyed said that during the holidays they want to attend a sporting event. The next one, participate in winter sports. Probably not here in Bangkok, but in Denver, Colorado, where I live, absolutely. People want to do winter sports, maybe go skiing on their vacation. And this is honestly the first time I'd seen this in this study. Participate in a race, a run or a bike event. 6%. And you might say, well, 6%, that's pretty low. And I'm here to tell you that the fact that this is even on this chart at all is significant. 6% out of 1,000, that's 60 people or so. Multiply each 1,000 by the traveling public. It's a big number. And these are people who are saying just during this holiday season we want to participate in a race. Maybe it's the people who don't want to visit their friends and relatives at the top. I don't know. But there's definitely an interest there. So that to me absolutely says something. And then this next chart, just interestingly, looks at what these numbers were a year before. And you see slight uptick. A year ago it was 5%. This year it's 6%. So it's slight. It's only one example. But again, this was the first time that I had noticed this in this study. And as I was preparing to talk with you all, I thought you might find that of interest as well. So the last study I'm going to talk about is a group called the Sports and Fitness Industry Association. They do a number of reports, and one that we monitor every year is called their Top Line Participation Report. This is a study that goes sport by sport, activity by activity, who is doing what sports are trending up, what sports are trending down, different fitness activities. Anyone want to guess? It's not on my slide, but in the United States, which sport over the last 2 years is a zillion years ahead in first place on the participation growth? What sport is seeing the fastest participation growth? Anyone guesses? Mike? Okay. Is it running? No, unfortunately it is not running. No, not soccer, not esports. It is pickleball. If pickleball has not come to your country, it is coming to your country. In the United States, it is up 40% last year, up on top of 20% the year before. So if you don't know pickleball, it's like tennis had a baby with table tennis. I don't know. It's people are playing it. It's all over the place. But I'm not going to talk about pickleball, although we can talk about that later. All right. So this number, again, a lot of stats, a lot of colors. But what's happening here is they break down their data by generation. So boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. This is a positive thing, I think, for your industry, for running events, for outdoor events. Fitness sports, individual sports, outdoor sports. These are the three highest ranking activities in general buckets that SFIA is surveying. So the other interesting thing here is when you look by generation, we talked about the younger generation. When you look at almost across the board here, that far right sort of lightest color, is Gen Z, the youngest, and they are ranking pretty high in outdoor sports, in fitness sports, and individual sports. Again, there's some opportunities, I think, there. All these things seem to fit into the industry really well when we look at participation. A lot of numbers on this, but this is pretty much the same thing, looking at a 3-year trend. And the only thing to note here, again, is just look at the high numbers that you see across the board, from boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, in fitness sports, individual sports, outdoor sports. These are ranking very high right now for things people participate in. This one I love. So SFIA asks people, what sports do you participate in? And what activities do you participate in? And if you saw this list of activities, it's amazing. It's like 150 things, and somewhere along the line, surely you are doing one of these things. Yet there are people who say, you know what, I don't do any of these things. I am 100% inactive. So then SFIA goes back and says, all right, to you people who are completely inactive, who have no interest in doing anything, what would you like to do? If you could do something, if we could get you outside to do anything, what would you do? Now, you see a lot of fishing is at the top of like all this list. And you and I, of course, would say, well, fishing isn't exactly the most active thing. But if you are completely inactive, fishing is a start for you. And so this association monitors those things. The thing that I'd like you to pay attention to, and all these colors are just different age groups that I picked out from this report. In the 6 to 12-year-old group, running and jogging is number 3, and arguably the most active of the active things on this list after fishing and camping. Of course, I don't know a single 6-year-old who doesn't like to run, and somehow they're finding these people to survey, but they're surveying them, and it's ranking high. It tends to drop off for whatever reason from 13 to 17-year-olds, but then look at the next 2 categories, 18 to 24-year-olds, 25 to 34-year-olds. Running and jogging is right up there at the top. So they're out there, even the people who are not involved in running or jogging, and that's the big challenge, of course, for all of you, is to figure out how to get to them. But when we see statistics like this, tracking participation, and we marry it with some of the travel statistics that I just showed to you, to me, there would seem to be some kind of opportunity out there that people are wanting to do something. And hopefully something a little more active than fishing or camping, although depending on your experience, maybe you can make that as active as you'd like it to be. So a few final takeaways, just kind of in summary. Again, I've thrown a lot of numbers out there. The specific numbers aren't even as important, I think, as just some of the general themes that we're seeing out there. So to me, there are still untapped opportunities when it comes to marketing destinations through sports events. I think cities are realizing the tremendous potential, economic potential that events have, and the tremendous potential that events, including your events, we'll talk about it in our next panel, have of generating travel and tourism. Sports-related travel, no doubt, took a serious hit during the pandemic. Your industry is having as hard a time as any, I think, getting back to 100%. But it is on its way, and the good news is that sports events in general, from what we're tracking, seem to be almost entirely caught up in 2021, and when we see those final numbers in 2022, I think we're going to see something that will be beyond the pre-pandemic level. And as I mentioned and have alluded to, COVID-19, of course, seems to be becoming less of an impediment to travel as time goes on. Again, I recognize that may not be the case in every country, in every jurisdiction, but certainly in the United States and the areas that we track, things are absolutely coming back. And there remain a tremendous opportunity, specifically in this area of fitness sports, as we just saw, from people who want to be active, as well as specifically running events for those who are not active, who want to try something. So to me, there are some genuine opportunities there. The last thing I'll leave you with, just a shameless plug for our events. I mentioned it, but we do a conference and trade show called the Teams Conference in the United States. We talk about these issues. We talk about sports events through the lens of travel and tourism. And if any of you are interested in hearing more about that, I would love to talk with you about it. Our U.S. event will be in the Palm Beaches of Florida in October. And as I've mentioned to a few of you, we also expanded into Europe this past year in London, and we will be back in London at the end of June, doing a lot of what we just talked about and having similar types of discussions. So I want to thank Chris Robb and Alessio for the opportunity to speak to you all and to present some of this information to you. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. We talk about it all the time at our magazine. As I said, we write about sports across the entire landscape. Mass participation events, running events, I think are some of the most impactful, if not the most impactful events that we write about. You're doing everything. You're not just bringing people to attend an event, you're bringing in people to participate in an event, and I think there's an incredible amount of value there for all of you. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time and for bearing with all my numbers, and then we'll transition into our next discussion.